So onto Bunnahabhain. This is the first of two of the Glenmore Rare Find bottles. I've got it just here, rather fantastic packaging, thumbprint in the middle, Rare Find, Bunnahabhain, big, aged 50 years right on the front, bang, age statement. Distilled 1968, bottled 2019, and it's the most fantastic colour in this whisky, absolutely gorgeous stuff. And I had a little sample of this whisky that was given to me by Derek a few weeks ago, I think probably from that bottle, so I was doing my tasting notes on this last night, and I was absolutely blown away by it. It took me about 4 sips until I actually wrote anything. I was just absolutely, silenced, speechless. I thought it was absolutely brilliant. So you guys are really, really in for a treat here. This Bunnahabhain, there is only 124 bottles, and it's down at 42.6% as well. So the Angels have really taken their share out of this cask. But in terms of an enjoyment perspective, in terms of nosing and tasting the liquid, it is all the better for it. Bunnahabhain as a distillery was established in 1881 by William Robertson from the famous Robertson and Baxter blending house, one of the biggest blending houses of the 19th century. He chose what was not the most obvious of locations. If you've been to Islay, or you look on the map, or you've been to Bunnahabhain, you'll know it's on the northeast coast, and there's nothing else there apart from the distillery at the end of the road, pretty much. And that's entirely what Robertson had to do, as well as building the distillery, because there was literally nothing around in the location that he chose. He had to build houses for his workers. He had to connect the distillery to the rest of the network on the island. He had to build a road. He also had to build a pier for barley and casks coming in and for his whisky going out. So he chose a really awkward spot, but a brilliant spot nonetheless, very, very picturesque, a beautiful part of the north side of the island. In 1887, it merged with Glenrothes to create Highland Distillers, which would then go on essentially to become Edrington. But despite this change of hands, it remained key to 3 big Robertson and Baxter blends: Famous Grouse, Cutty Sark, and then latterly Black Bottle as well. The distillery from its inception in the early 1880s produced almost constantly, albeit not during the wars, but right through until the 1960s. And in 1963, again we've got that big boom time, the distillery was expanded from 2 to 4 stills. The floor maltings were decommissioned, and so it would get its floor maltings, it would get its barley brought in from external maltsters. This would be pre-Port Ellen maltings. They were established in 1973, so for a decade or so, we'd have to source elsewhere. I'll talk a bit more about Port Ellen maltings, obviously, when we get to the final whisky. But really, from that point, from that expansion point, its peating level at Bunnahabhain dropped to virtually 0, and it continued like that all the way through until relatively recently. Which, when you think of Islay whisky, is a little bit different. Most Islay whiskies are really quite heavily peated when you think of Bowmore, Lagavulin, Lafroy, Barbeg, etc. The Octomore and Port Charlotte varietals coming out of Bruichladdich, Kilchoman as well, for Kalila, all of them. But up until the 1960s, it would have been heavily peated. Then after the expansion, it was no longer peated. Today, though, after it was sold to Burn Stewart in 2003, and then to its current owners, Distell, in 2013, I think it was, about 20% of today's production is heavily peated Bunnahabhain. And you'll find the heavily peated variants are bottled either as heavily peated Bunnahabhain on a label, or it might say Bunnahabhain Moyne, M-O-I-N-E. And Moyne is Gaelic for peat, so it kind of gives you a clue that if you see a Bunnahabhain Moyne bottling out there, it's likely to be smoky Bunnahabhain. Now, in the 1980s, much like all other distilleries at some point, it was mothballed between 82 and 84. So not for a particularly long time, and then when it resumed production was kept at really quite a low level, but it survived and thrived, like I say. And this week, if you've been following any of the Islay brands on social media, this week would have been the Fèis Eel, the Islay Whisky Festival, which obviously can't happen this year, but each distillery has been having their individual open day streamed virtually online on Facebook and Instagram and stuff like that. Bunnahabhain's is on Friday, and I'm thoroughly looking forward to tuning in to their open day on Friday night and tasting a couple of their your Islay Festival bottlings for this year. So this is, as I said, we've got the sort of the packaged product here, the final bottling here. It's not out in the market quite yet. It is going to be released later in the year, much like the Port Ellen is. So even though the Port Ellen is also in a nice rare fine bottle like this, it's not out there quite yet. It will be released later in the year, with the first parcel of stock, I think, is earmarked for Royal Mile whiskies. So if you really enjoy this, keep an eye on the RMW website later in the year and on their social media. They will get the first parcel of stock. Price, I think, is still to be confirmed, but it's a 50-year-old Bunnahabhain, so I'll let you take your own guesses at how much a bottle of this might cost later in the year. Now, like I say, it's a 1968, so this is pre this will also be sherry cask as well. I don't think it says on the label, but I confirmed with Greg yesterday, it is a sherry cask, so it's going to be a transportation sherry cask. So we're going to get all of those old school sherry notes likely coming through on the nose and on the palate. Now, 1968, which was when this whiskey was distilled. Some of the things that were going on in the world back then. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. It was also the year that the first Big Mac went on sale at McDonald's. It was the year the first heart transplant took place as well. And in terms of films, we had 2001: A Space Odyssey. We had Night of the Living Dead, a bit of a cult classic, and we had Bullet as well. That classic car chase through San Francisco, Steve McQueen in that American muscle car, one of the best car chases of all time, if you ask me. Music-wise, we had Born to be Wild by Steppenwolf. We had Hey Jude by the Beatles, and All Along the Watchtower by the Jimi Hendrix Experience. So yeah, quite a year, 1968. This was bottled, like I say, just last year, 42.6% ABV. I can't believe I'm going to taste this 2 nights in a row. That's, yeah, very, very lucky boy. So let me know what you're getting on the nose and on the palate for this one. So for me, I'll give you my tasting notes, see what you think of them, if you agree, disagree, if you get different things. My first nosing, and I've got it again just there, it noses initially is really quite maritime. What, salted caramel or salted nut mix, something like that. There's a real maritime coastal thing coming through right the first off. And then it quickly moves into sort of black forest fruits, dark cherry, antique woods, a little bit of nectarine, plum jam, blackberry, rum-soaked raisins, all those rich, unctuous things going on. But at the same time, there's a distinct sort of oily, waxy, slightly dirty thing going on, which I quite like. I got it as sort of linseed oil, paraffin, a bit of engine grease, a bit of hessian as well. Certainly layered, a lot going on. Just such an inviting nose. Really draws you right in. Let's give it a taste. Every bit as good as when I tasted it last night. Whoa. Very rich and sticky. That's the first impression that I got. More of those black forest fruit, more of those cherries, a touch of molasses, a lot of that dark, rich, fruity stuff that I got in the nose really translates to the palate. We're getting some nosing notes in. Ryan, thanks for joining me again this evening. Thanks for joining the second tasting again after last time. Hope you're enjoying the dram so far. Blackcurrant, raspberries, aged brandy, yep. Apples, freshly polished oak, yeah, a lot of that polish, varnish, old oaks coming on. Sanjoy, my only note is immense. Yeah, that's absolutely fair enough. You can see why it took me 4 attempts at tasting this last night before I even put pen to paper to write anything down. I was absolutely blown away by it. It's absolutely stunning stuff. Stunning stuff. Palate-wise, but James, or a touch of chippy sauce Yeah, you're showing your class there, aren't you, mate? That's but I see what you mean. When I tasted it, there actually was a bit of Branston pickle for me, or a bit of sort of like frazzles. That shows my class as well. So those smoky bacon crisps that you get. God, that's good. Yeah, on the palate, like I say, to start with, I got all those sticky fruits right off the bat. Moving into this, blackberry as well, yeah. Plum, apricot, lots of stewed orchard fruits. Spice-wise, I was moving into things like a touch of cumin, a little bit of fennel, a bit of star anise, sort of really aromatic, earthy, woody, slightly fruity spices going on. The licorice for me just reminded me of blackjack sweets. And you must have read my notes there, Ryan. I got polished mahogany as my final note on the palate, along with maybe a little bit of poppy seed, something that's darker. It's not quite peppery, but there is a sort of char, a bit of sort of woody stuff going on right at the finish, which is layered layered and complex to say the least. Samuel saying the nose, cream, strawberry, walnut. Definitely get your walnut thing. On the palate, grass, peach velvet, lemon pepper. Fair enough. Yeah, the velvet. Do you eat much peach velvet in your time? I don't know if that's velvety mouthfeel. Is that what you're going for there? I managed to probably see you said pepper, right? Yeah, we're very much in the same ballpark there. But I think what strikes me about this whiskey, 50 years old, and we're talking about touches of polished mahogany or teak or antique furniture. It's not particularly oaky though. The wood has certainly not swamped the spirit. 50 years, particularly in an old style sherry cask, you could quite easily have found that this is so tannic and woody that you taste it and it turns your face inside out. And I've been in the fortunate / unfortunate position of tasting some cask samples, some whiskies. It's not from this distillery, but of a similar age, 46, 47, 48 years old. They were in first fill Oloroso casks for their whole life. They looked like Coke. The nose was quite promising, but as soon as you tasted them on the palate, they just drew all the moisture out of your being. Essentially, I was dangerously dehydrated after tasting those, and it completely the wood had totally overwhelmed the spirit, and in essence, it was a hugely unbalanced and actually quite an unpleasant whiskey. But in this case here, the balance between the very restrained wood influence has really allowed a lot of that fruitiness and those maritime notes to marry all together, and that's a beautiful liquid. What people saying, so it reminds me of soft cake icing. Yeah, a little bit. There is a lightness there. It's not all dark and brooding. It was cherry brandy. Yeah, great shout. Cherry brandy, plum. Yep, fantastic dram. Totally agree. Totally agree. So I'm going to take my final sip of this one just now. Whew. And the big hitters just keep coming. Like I say, just like with the Glenlivet, take your time with this. I'm leaving a little bit in here. I might top it up with a little bit more from the sample bottle later, because it is such a joyous dram. But take time with it. It is 50 years old. So it is, from that initial tasting that we've had just now and over the past few minutes, it is going to change in 15 minutes, half an hour, 45 minutes. So do keep coming back to it over the course of the evening. It's a very rewarding whisky in that sense. There's always new things that you'll find going back to it time and again as the evening progresses. Right, how do you then follow up a 1968 50-year-old Bunnahabhain? I suppose with a 1953 Talsiker. So they just keep coming. So we're going over the sea to Skye now. That's a wee Curry reference if you're into your Scottish folk music there. And Talsiker really encapsulates the movement of distilling knowledge, I suppose. If you look back at the history of alchemy and of distillation, I won't bore you with the sort of 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 years worth of history, but it essentially came out of ancient Mesopotamia, the Middle East, really travelled across the Mediterranean, and then from that part of continental Europe to Ireland and then to Scotland. And Talsiker sits very nicely. It kind of straddles both the Irish and Scottish ways of making whisky. From its inception in 1830 right through for almost a century, it was actually triple distilled until 1928. And it retains this very odd 5-still setup where you have 3 wash stills and 2 spirit stills. Usually you wouldn't have, that's a bit unbalanced for me. but it retains this 5 still setup, which is probably a relic of when it used to be triple distilled. And when it was established in 1830, it was established by a pair of brothers, Hugh and Kenneth MacPhail. They were sons of a local doctor, and just like a lot of distilleries that were established in the early 1800s, it passed through several hands. It was owned by a number of people as the 1800s progressed, and at one point in 1880, it was partly owned by the Victorian distilling giant Roderick Kemp. I mentioned him last time. The reason I mentioned him last time is because in 1892, he sold his share in Talsiker in order to fund his purchase of the Macallan. By the late 1800s, Talsiker was very highly regarded, just like the Glenlivet was, for example. It was highly sought after both by local drinkers on the island and those on the mainland as well, I imagine, but also by blenders at the same time. And in the late 1800s, Robert Louis Stevenson wrote in his, what was it, I've not actually written it down here, it's A Scotsman's Return from Abroad, I think that's what it's called. He says, but mostly the blood o' Scots, frae Maidenkirk to John O'Groats, the king o' drinks, as I conceive it, Talsiker, Islay, or Glenlivet. And so with those three, with Talsiker, the Islay, just had been having in Glenlivet, we've covered those three, or we will when we get to this fourth whisky now. We've still got one to go. So it was very highly sought after, so much so that Robert Louis Stevenson felt compelled to write about it and to name it in his poem there. From there, when we move into the 20th century, it was folded into the DCL, much like a lot of distilleries were in the 1920s, but it wasn't all plain sailing. The boom of the 1960s started with a bang, I suppose, at Talsiker on the 22nd of November 1960. The valve on spirit still number 1 was left open, and then when they tried to distill, the spirit bubbled up, came out the valve, fell onto the coal fires, as it would have been back then. So this is direct fire as well, obviously. And it burnt down the still house and much of the rest of the distillery. It took DCL 2 years to resume production, 1962, and it continued for a decade until 1972, and that's when the floor maltings were decommissioned. The 60s and 70s were really the key time when a lot of distilleries shifted from malting their own barley to buying it in from industrial maltsters. In Talsiker's case, they sourced barley from Glen Ord maltings near Inverness. And in 1972 as well, the stills were converted from direct coal firing. They missed out the gas direct firing and went straight to steam heating. This is a 1953 distillate, so in terms of the differences in production between then and now, it shares a lot of similarities with what we saw and what I spoke about with the Glenlivet, in terms of it was created using a very old, ancient barley variety. In the 1950s, we're probably into sort of Proctor territory, possibly something like that. It's pre-Golden Promise. We might still be using Plumage Archer at that point, not quite sure. Those of you, if you're really into your barleys, do let me know. But it would have been floor malted. As I say, the stills were obviously direct fired in 1953. That's why everything went up in flames in 1960. And also, I think I pointed it out before, on the neck of the bottle, it said matured in sherry wood. So this would have been matured in those transportation sherry casks that I mentioned before. Quite a different but similar style of sherry cask compared to what we use today. What we also managed to get from the base of this bottle, and I've got them here, you won't be able to see on the stream just because of the resolution, but Tim has taken a fantastic video of this. I'll try and get one later as well, just a photograph to show you the solids, the floaters that are in this sample. This is a sample of the whiskey that was drawn out of the bottle. And if you have any foreign bodies in your Glenlivet or your Talsiker tonight, don't worry. This is completely natural phenomenon that has happened. These are what we call calcium oxalate crystals. Okay, calcium oxalate, and in a high enough volume, they'll give you kidney stones. But rest assured that if there's any in your glasses tonight, they're at such a small amount, they're not going to do you any harm whatsoever. But calcium oxalate is a byproduct of calcium ions in water mixing with oxalic acid. And for me, in the work that I do as an auctioneer, taking a bottle that was bottled in the 60s or the 70s or possibly the 80s. It's a quick and easy way of determining whether that bottle actually was bottled then, or the whisky was filled then and the bottle was closed then. And the reason for that is that over time, you will get a coming together of these calcium ions and the oxalic acid. So before distilleries used deionized or demineralized water, as they do now, to reduce their whisky down to bottling strength, in this case, I think we're at 43% again, they wouldn't have used that. The technology wasn't there. They just used clear spring water. They would have filtered it to take out leaves and branches and small children that were playing in the burn, but that's about it. They wouldn't have demineralized it to make sure that it was just hydrogen and oxygen that was in that. That's what demineralized water is. It would have contained a bunch of minerals, things like chloride ions and magnesium and possibly copper and iron, and also calcium. And so it's this calcium from the reducing water that reacts very, very slowly over time, over years, decades in a bottle, with oxalic acid. And oxalic acid is a natural byproduct of mashing and fermentation. And so when you get these two things coming together over a long period of time, they will join up, they will crystallize, they will precipitate out of solution. In other words, they will solidify and become little floaters rather than being dissolved in your whisky. And it's just a really easy way of, for me, if somebody gives me a bottle and says, oh, this is a bottle in the 70s, if it's completely clear and colourless and there's absolutely no what we call flocculation, you call this flock, as well as calcium oxalate crystals. If there are these things, just eyeballing the bottle, that tells me, oh yeah, this was bottled a while ago. It's just one of those sort of check-off points right at the start of valuing or authenticating a bottle that I can say, oh, this has been closed for a long time. That's as far as I'll go with that. So we've got them here. Like I say, I'll try and get some nice photos of this. Tim and I did get a fantastic slow-mo video of me turning this little sample bottle upside down and the crystals all falling down. So we'll see if we can get that online at some point, or see if she puts that on Instagram or something to be able to check that out. But I'll certainly try and get some imagery as well. It's a geeky scientific part of whisky, but something that I find interesting. So hopefully you guys find it interesting as well. So we're on to Talsiker. So let's taste the liquid. Let's stop talking about chemistry. 1953. So 1953, what happened then? We had the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II. We had the first polio vaccine developed in 1953. The first colour TV went on sale in that year. And the first James Bond novel was published as well, Casino Royale. It was also the year that Watson and Crick discovered the double helix structure of DNA. And it was the year the first Playboy magazine was issued as well, with Marilyn Monroe as the cover star. So speaking of Marilyn Monroe, if we look at films that were released in that year, we had Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, starring her, of course. We had War of the Worlds, and we had the original Peter Pan as well. In terms of music, again, musical records aren't as well kept as I'd hoped they would have been, even from the 50s. But you would have been listening to B.B. King, Hank Williams, Ray Charles, people like that. So that's what was going on in 1953 when this whisky was being laid down into cask. It's a 24-year-old. So what does that make? It bottled in 1977. And again, it's a Pinerolo import. It would have been destined for Turin in the Italian market. And yeah, just love looking at those labels like that. They're absolutely brilliant. There we go. So that's the Talsiker. Let's give it a nose. Just so different to Talsiker you've tasted today, unless you've been fortunate enough to taste sort of Talsiker 25, Talsiker 30. That's where, for me, you see a bit of a resemblance between this liquid and current high-aged bottlings from Talsiker. Very different to that sort of peppery, upfront smokiness that you'll find in the 10-year-old or the 57 degrees north, or Portree or Skye or anything like that. It's really sweet, ashy, sort of coal smoke, like coal bunker, sweet, sooty smoke. For me, let me know what you think. Keep the comments coming in. They're being texted to me, I think, as I look across the room right now, which is great. Lots of polishes again, but shoe polish, bit of boot polish possibly. It's quite resinous. I mentioned camphor before, I get that again. Really orange zesty as well. Big liqueur, got honey, bit of quince as well. Phenol oils. Quite heavy. Let's see what's coming in. Derek. Ah, evening Derek. Gunpowder. Yeah, well, I got sooty smoke. We're right there. Chocolate orange. Orange says. Ginger and brine. Yeah, definitely the brine note. There's a real coastal thing going on. It's amazing how it jumps out the glass though. There's a bit of eucalyptus, sort of menthol. It's sort of minty, but in an almost cough syrup kind of way. Very resinous as well, pine sap. Ryan, big taste notes that coming in here on the nose. Musky smoke, yep. Sea salt spray, yep. Cherries, blackberries, plum, yep. Then it becomes fresher. Lychee and apple, yep. Yeah, that freshness is something that I was quite surprised at, actually, when I first nosed this. It's really into apple brandy now, isn't it? Looks great nose, yeah, agree. Surprisingly smooth on the palate. I'm not quite there yet, but I can't wait. Yeah, there's a medicinal side in there for me. Bandages, little whiff of first aid box. Things that you really, or I don't find on many Talsikers nowadays, again, unless you're looking at the older ones, sort of 25 years old plus. But let's give it a taste. So herbal. Lots of herbal tinctures and ointments and other stuff. Right in the front palate. Very, very herbaceous. Orange liqueur. A few people are saying, yeah, chocolate orange too. Good. Jackie Jack saying also, you can't get a floater in your glass. Yeah, well, if it's a hallmark of very old whiskey, then I'm all for it. Absolutely. Resinous things coming back again for me. Orange liqueur, I got some grilled herbs, I got a little bit of peppery smoke, that hallmark of more contemporary Talsiker. That's there, kind of niche right the front of the tongue, maybe not peppery, but maybe that ginger note that somebody said before, that sort of zesty nip that you get from ginger. Samuel on the nose, burnt tire, coke, yeah, on the palate, getting pineapple surface cleaner. You got fancy surface cleaner in your house, I tell you. And a little bit of ash, yeah, I really get that ashiness coming through. On the palate, it's more blood orange, sweet lemons, rock salt. I was getting all those things. Tasting this, that's quite a Talsiker, isn't it? The more I go back to it, the more those sort of quite candied fruits are coming out. It's moving into, yeah, candied pineapple. I get that. Blueberry or sort of those bubblegum, juicy fruit gum notes coming through. Absolutely gorgeous. Derek's palate, what are you saying? Engine grease, yeah. Damson jam. Funky dunnage, it's very dunnagey, yeah. Dunnage warehouse is a great descriptor. Telling on the finish for me, it's like, you know, going into a dunnage warehouse and licking a cask. It's like that sea salt, yeah, the classic maritime notes coming through. Rolling peat smoke on the finish. I'm moving into slight bits of black tea, dark chocolate. It's becoming that woodiness is starting to show right in the finish there for me. Nigel, you're getting a bit of germaline. Yeah, I went down that slightly medicinal note, particularly in the nose with the first aid box and the elastoplast, that bandages, that sort of thing. Right there with you on the germaline note. That's a great shout. Don't know if anybody's tasted Talsiker from this era. If you have, let me know. Let it how it compares to anything you might have got your hands on if you've attended the Whisky Show in Raid or Limburg or Maltstock or the ones that take place at Rotterdam, Whisky Base, etc. Let me know, not just for the Talsiker, but for any of the whiskies tonight, if you've tasted stuff that's similar. That'd be great to hear. Gonna give this one final taste before we move on to the final whisky. It's just absolutely joyous liquid. Absolutely stunning stuff. Oh, right. Just a small matter of tasting a Port Ellen now, isn't there? So, like I say, there's no rush with any of these. You can replay this video in your own time if you want to take even more time over the whiskies than I am. I am leaving some in my glass, like I say. I'll be enjoying them with the guys here at a socially safe distance, of course, once this tasting has finished and the live stream's over. But I will move on to, in the interest of time, I will move on to the Port Ellen now. We've got an alarmingly full bottle here, which I think might not be as full by the time I go home tonight. We'll see. But we're finishing on a Port Ellen, and that's really, when you've tasted, you know, a 1975 North of Scotland closed grain, a 1938 Glenlivet, a 1968 Bunnahabhain, and a 1953 Talsiker, it only feels right that you finish on arguably the most sought after of all the closed distilleries, and that is Port Ellen. Now, many of you will know that the industry inside out. You'll have seen the announcements made in the autumn of 2017 when it was announced that Brora, Port Ellen and Rosebank were to reopen. And if you've been keeping up with the virtual Fèis Eel on social media this week that I mentioned before, you'll have seen, I think, Georgie Crawford, who's overseeing the reopening of Port Ellen. She did a couple of videos on the Fèis Eel Facebook page, I think, or it could be on the Friends of Classic Malts Facebook page, one of the two. Did a couple of videos giving a bit of an update on the progress of the reopening and the rebirth of Port Ellen. And you'll see that a lot of progress has been made, and we're not that far away now to seeing spirit run off the stills at the Port Ellen distillery once again, which is something I absolutely cannot wait for. The distillery in its current state was established in 1825 by Alexander Mackay, and just like I mentioned with Talsiker and other distilleries that were established in the early 1800s, it passed through a number of hands before it was folded into the VCL in 1925. It stayed open only for 5 years. They closed it in 1930, all the way through to April of 1967. So not a lot of people know that. A lot of people think, oh yeah, Port Ellen is closed now, it's shut in 1983, which is true, but not a lot of people know that it only actually distilled in more recent memory between 1967 and 1983, so really not for that long at all. In 1973, the large drum maltings were built. Those are the huge grey buildings that you see dwarfing the old distillery buildings now. If you go to the site on the south shore, southwest of the Kildalton Malt Shore on Islay, and it closed in 1983, but the maltings stayed open. The maltings were there really to supply malt to Port Ellen, obviously until 1983, but also to Gleann and Lagavulin, the other two distilleries in the DCL portfolio. But it was really a casualty of the downturn of the 1980s, and it closed its doors in 1983. Only a small amount of smoky whisky was required then for blending, and so the DCL decided to keep Lagavulin and Gleann, and decided to totally close the doors, very sadly, on Port Ellen. But with such a huge amount of money being spent on those drum maltings just a decade before, there was a gentleman's agreement between all of the distilleries on Islay, and I think Jura was in on it as well, whereby each distillery would source a proportion of its malt from the Port Ellen maltings, just to keep them in operation. Now, since closing, Port Ellen's reputation has grown and grown, and its desirability has skyrocketed, as have prices of its bottles of whisky. This is largely driven by the quality of releases that we've seen over the years in Diageo's annual special releases, and personally from independent bottlers such as Signatory, Douglas Lane, There's some silver seal bottlings as well, a few others. But Signatory and Douglas Lane were really the two that really opened my eyes, I think, to Port Ellen back in probably the late noughties, back when you could still get a bottle for just over £100, which seems crazy nowadays, doesn't it? Now this, what we've got here, I'll pour my dram. This is a 1983 vintage, and thankfully the lids on all the sample bottles tonight have been easy to open, so that's good. It's a 1983 vintage. It was distilled on the 16th of March 1983, so just 2 months before the distillery closed its doors completely in the May of that year. It was bottled on the 5th of November 2016 as a 33-year-old. As you can see, we've got a bottle here in front of me. Like I said, just like with the Bunnahabhain, it is now a packaged product. It's not quite around on the market like this yet. It will be later this year, and just like the Bunnahabhain, I'm pretty sure the first parcel of stock will be earmarked for Royal Mile whiskies. So if you're really enjoying this Port Ellen, keep an eye on the RMW website and social media for when that stock goes online there. Many of you watching tonight will know just what the prices of bottles of Port Ellen go for now at auction, let alone retail, so I'll let you make up your own minds as to how much you think this bottle of Port Ellen will go for. But it's just a pleasure to taste Port Ellen. It always is. I've had the pleasure of tasting numerous Port Ellens over the years, usually some of the actual special releases, but independent bottlings as well. And by and large, the quality of the whisky that I've tasted every single time has been exceptional. I was told last night by Greg that Jim Murray in his Whisky Bible, whether you read that or not or pay any attention, that's up to you. But in his Whisky Bible, he rated this as at 96.5 points. And whether you agree or disagree with Jim on any number of things, he knows a good whisky when he tastes it. So to give something 96.5 is no mean feat. So let's get into this one. Let that open up a little bit. It's at 57%. So we have gone from the past three whiskies have all been 43, 42.5, 42.6, and 43. So we've stepped it up against a cask strength. It's natural cask strength. It is a single cask. At a bottle at cask strength, 57%. Only 249 bottles from that single cask. Now, 1983. Last time when we finished on a 1983 Kalila, we're finishing on an 83 Port Ellen now, so I'm just recycling some of the stuff because nothing's changed. It was 1983. It was the year when Mario Brothers video game was released. It was the year when Fraggle Rock debuted on TV, and the year when Microsoft Word was launched as well. Film-wise, we had Star Wars: Return of the Jedi, we had Flashdance, and we had Terms of Endearment. And in terms of music, Uptown Girl from Billy Joel, Total Eclipse of the Heart by Bonnie Tyler, and Billie Jean by Michael Jackson. So that's what was happening in the world in 1983 when this whisky was being laid down. Like I say, just a couple of months at most until in the last 2 months of production at Port Ellen until it closed its doors. Let me know what you think of this. Let me know how it compares to other Port Ellens you've had. Really medicinal for a Port Ellen, right off the top nose for me. I think Nigel, you mentioned last time you got Germaline notes. I'm getting all of that again. Getting a lot of Germaline. Moving into sort of Tiger Balm, that sort of thing. That's big. So people asking me to double check the ABV. I did say 57, was I right on that? No, I'm right, it's 57, yeah. Does seem high for a 33-year-old. Must have been quite a mean cask, not a lot going to the Angels, but yeah, definitely 57% on the label here. Yeah, a lot of people are asking me to double check that. Is it just because of the age of it and you thought it'd be a bit lower, or is it because the nose is super soft? Port Ellen at that time, right at the end, I wonder if they were also filling at still strength rather than filling at 63.5%. That might have something to do with it. Either that or it's just a really, really, really tight cask. But I've got to go with what's on the label, and I'm sure the the gauging has been done correctly. So yeah, in terms of tasting notes, for me, it's very medicinal up front. I've got a lot of that germaline, a little bit of sauvignon, that tiger balm, quite mentholated as well. It is very clean on top. People say it says 42.6 on samples. That's just a relic from the other Glenmore bottling. That's the ABV of the Bunnahabhain. So if it says 42.6 on your sample bottle for the Port Ellen, it's just not been updated from the writing of the labels for the Bunnahabhain, I'm afraid, but it is 57%. Sorry about the mislabeling there. I'm happy to put you right in person. It is 57. Lots of sweet peat, quite sort of damp, wet straw, smouldering bonfire. Lots of seafood barbecue notes as well. Embers and burnt seaweed. Lobster shells and crab creels, all that sort of stuff. There is a bit of fruitiness underneath. It's not all clean and maritime. A little bit of apricot, smoked apple. Definitely get some smoked apple. A little bit of honeycomb as well. But the spiciness that's there, this is where I'm getting that cracked black peppercorn thing, which I thought I might have got on the Talsiker. It manifested itself as something different from me, but it really is coming through as that on this Port Ellen. Because it just totally encapsulates that southern Islay coastline, doesn't it? All the maritime notes, a bit of fruit, good punch of smoke, a lot of seafoody things going on, a lot of coastal things. Exactly what you want from Port Ellen. And I think now that if you all taste it, that's definitely not 42.6%. That is just a typo. It is 57. So that is big and muscular. It starts off, there's a savoury thing to start with for me, sort of glazed ham with some cloves, some sweet earthy notes, maybe some chutney, juicy currants. What are we getting here? MacPhail is the Port Ellen cask strength. Yes, it's a natural cask strength. Single cask Port Ellen. 33 years old, 57%, one of 249 bottles. Yeah, you're absolutely right there. Jackie Jack, typical Islay medicinal smell. Yeah, a lot of medicinal notes right at the top of that one. Sometimes with Port Ellen, I tend to err more very much on the maritime notes, married with the smoke and then the woodiness from the cask. But a lot of medicinal stuff coming out of this Port Ellen, which, given this blind, I might have said this is possibly a late 70s Ardbeg. You know, I might have said this is possibly a late 70s or early 80s Lefroy with that medicinal stuff. Not a note that I'd necessarily associate with Port Ellen, certainly with Islay, maybe not so much specifically with Port Ellen, but it's a joy to find that in this one. Ryan, popping in, peat and coal smoke, yeah, heather, lavender, there's a floral element in there, definitely. Pink peppercorn, yeah. You said, Nigel, it really packs a punch, it really does. It really does. That is unapologetic Port Ellen, which I absolutely love. The palate for me, like I say, it started off with that sort of savoury thing, that sort of glazed ham, clove, chutney, juicy currants, charred bacon I got as well, a little bit of wet canvas, the phenol oils are in there. But it's not all that. There is a fruitiness there. Getting some apple chews, maybe a touch of lime, lemon rind. There's a certain citrusy thing that keeps things fresh. Ryan agreeing with my notes. That's always good. Good stuff. It means I'm not talking total nonsense. Thanks for that, Ryan. Yeah, that's fantastic. Now, is it 57? I've got a bit left in the sample bottle, so I am going to add a touch of water to this just to see what happens. Don't want to drown it. I'm just going to add a little bit more than that. Maybe try and bring it down to sort of 40–45%, just to see. Mix around. The only whisky in the lineup that was distilled after Greg was born. This is the whisky in the lineup that is the closest to to before when I was born. I'm 87. But yeah, that's just a testament to the liquid that's been donated tonight by Derek to see that the youngest vintage is a 1983. It's an extraordinary lineup to be able to talk about, so I hope you've all enjoyed it this evening. Yeah, with that water, the fruit's coming out a little bit more. It's not lost anything on the nose anyway. The fruit's come more to the fore. The smoke has kind of gone into the background a little bit more. Yeah, that's taken water very, very well. If you've left some of the neat whisky in your sample bottle and you've got just a few mils in your glass at the moment, I would advise you to add just a touch of water to this to see how it changes, because it really has changed quite significantly for me. The fruit development, that's really changed with a little bit of water. We're into sort of ice cream cone, sort of pink wafer, marshmallows that you've left a bit too long over the fire, sort of charred, slightly melted marshmallow sort of thing. Like stewed orchard fruits coming through now. Oh. What a whisky to finish on. So I hope you've enjoyed the tasting tonight. I am going to have to empty one of my glasses because, just like last time, I'm going to highlight the library of whisky that's behind me here. What have I got? I've got most of north of Scotland. That's the sample bottle that is most full. So let's finish that one. I'm just going to rinse this glass out. And last time, I pointed you at the end to the library of whisky that you can see behind me on the shelves here. There's 200 plus bottles, I think, on the shelves behind me. There's a few more boxed up over there and elsewhere in this warehouse. And last time I said that this is a space that Glenmore Leith Spirits are looking to utilise a bit more once lockdown is eventually lifted. And with this library behind me, they're not just bottles that are going to sit there and gather dust. They are all for opening, for tastings, for events, for business partners, and other things. So it's a really fantastic space that could be used once we're allowed to properly socialise rather than virtually socialise. So just like last time, I've plucked a bottle off the back shelf there. Let that glass dry a little bit. But we'll get to the bottle that I've plucked off in just a second. You're saying with water it brings out flowers and fruits. Yeah, I totally get the fruitiness. Floral thing, I think Ryan, were you before? You were saying stuff to do with heather and lavender and stuff like that. Yeah, we're going into sort of jasmine, honeydew, meadow sweet, maybe. Certainly sweetened up with a bit of water, so right there with you. Oh. Anyway, what 5 drams. This is more or less dry now, that glass, that's great. Keep the tasting notes coming in. I will be looking over the stream again once we're all done, likely tomorrow morning at some point. But I hope you have all enjoyed dramming these fantastic whiskies with me this evening for such a worthy cause as well. Thanks to everybody who joined tonight. Thanks to everybody who bought a sample pack, who's commented on the stream, who's asked questions, who's provided tasting notes. I've thoroughly enjoyed going through these 5 whiskies with you this evening. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have as we drammed our way through. I counted it up and I think I'm right in that there has been 186 years of maturation in the 5 glasses in front of us this evening. So that's got to be some sort of record somewhere. Thanks again to Derek for donating these the cask sample and these bottles from your business and from your collection, to Timna and to Greg for looking after the stream tonight, the digital setup, managing the comments and WhatsApping them to me from across the room. I've mentioned the library behind me, and I was looking along, and there was one duplicate, so I thought that's probably the one that will open. And I have pre-opened it because the cork snapped, so I had to pre-open it off camera before we went live. And it's a bottle of Balvenie. It's a bottle of the Balvenie Founders Reserve, as it's called, in what was the cognac bottle. That's what you call this style of Balvenie from the early 80s. It's a joyous whiskey. I tasted this for the first time maybe 5 or 6 years ago. Absolutely fell in love with it. So I'm going to pour myself a little celebratory dram and then pass the bottle round to the guys and girls that have helped me tonight in just a minute. Got things coming in on WhatsApp. Let's have a look. Nigel, what he's saying. This was the only whiskey he felt better worked with water. That's very interesting. Yeah. Granted, I didn't add water to the previous 3, so I didn't think they needed it being down at 42, 43%. The north of Scotland I did because it was a little bit higher, it was getting towards 50%, but maybe lost a little bit. But adding water to that 4 Ellen, that just shows an exceptional whiskey when you can nose and taste it neat and it's brilliant, and then you can add a little bit of water and it changes the whiskey but retains that brilliance. So that's just an exceptional single cask 4 Ellen. I'm really with you there, Nigel, in that adding a bit of water to this has changed. Does it change it for the better? That's all personal preference, but it certainly opened it up and changed the liquid, and it remains a fantastic whiskey, even reduced down to 40-odd%, the strength that I've sort of diluted mine down to. Anyway, back to this Balvenie. I'm going to have this as a little celebratory dram. Thank you all again for joining me tonight and enjoying the tasting. We might do this again. We might. There's been no conversation as of yet, but we might do it again with a totally different lineup. Who knows? If we do, keep an eye out on the Edinburgh Whisky Blog social media channels for future announcements. That's where you'll find any tastings that we do in the future. I'd love to be able to do this all again with you with a totally different lineup. See what else we can do. See how much more money we can raise for this this brilliant initiative to making this hand sanitizer. But in the meantime, stay safe. Stay home, don't stay alert. That's for what we do in England. Stay home in the meantime, but more importantly, stay safe. And I'll hopefully be able to enjoy a proper dram with you all in person at some point, rather than through the lens of a camera. Slainte.